a ghost story from the 1990s along the American River. In the summer of 1994, along the winding banks of the Mississippi River in a quiet stretch near a small town called Riverbend, a series of mysterious events began to unsettle the locals. Riverbend, at the time, was a sleepy town with a population of barely over 1,000, but the river was its lifeblood, providing both recreation and a steady supply of local folklore. Among the residents, tales of a river spirit had existed for decades, whispered around campfires and shared during long summer evenings. These stories typically described a spectral figure, often seen as a pale, floating apparition hovering just above the waterline at night, sometimes reflecting in the river like a shadow with glowing eyes. Most locals dismissed these tales as superstition, the sort of stories meant to keep children from wandering too close to the water. But the events of the summer of 1994 gave these old legends a chilling new credibility. It all began with a teenager named Daniel Harris, an adventurous 17-year-old who often spent his evenings fishing along the quieter bends of the river. One warm July evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a muted shade of purple, Daniel noticed a figure standing across the riverbank, a woman in a flowing white dress. At first, he assumed it was a local camper or a fisherman's wife, but as he waved, she did not respond. Intrigued, Daniel began to make his way downstream, trying to catch up, but with every step, the figure seemed to drift further away, gliding over the water as if she were floating rather than walking. By the time Daniel reached the point where he last saw her, she had vanished. Over the next week, reports began to surface of other sightings along the river, all occurring near the same bend. Fishermen, hikers, and even a couple of campers claimed to have seen the same spectral figure, a woman in white, sometimes crying silently, other times staring blankly across the water. Some witnesses described feeling an overwhelming chill, as though the air itself had turned cold, and a few even reported faint whispers that seemed to echo from the riverbank. The local sheriff, initially skeptical, began to receive calls from increasingly panicked residents. One evening, a family driving along the riverside reported that their headlights briefly illuminated a woman standing in the middle of the narrow road. They swerved to avoid hitting her, but when they stopped to look back, the road was empty, and the footprints in the dirt appeared to vanish into thin air. Word spread quickly through Riverbend, and the small town, usually quiet in the evenings, became filled with unease. Some residents recalled a tragic event decades earlier, in 1962, when a young woman named Evelyn Moore had drowned in that very bend of the river under mysterious circumstances. According to local records, Evelyn had been walking along the river at night, wearing a white dress, when she somehow fell in. Despite search efforts, her body was never fully recovered. The story, passed down through generations, claimed that her spirit lingered, unable to move on, searching endlessly for something lost in the water. Experts in paranormal activity, when contacted later, suggested that locations with traumatic or unresolved deaths often develop what are known as residual hauntings, a phenomenon where energy from past events imprints on a location and occasionally manifests to the living as visual or auditory anomalies. While skeptics argued that the sightings could be explained by river fog, reflections, or mass hysteria, the consistency of descriptions and the emotional impact on witnesses lent a certain weight to the phenomenon. Residents began noticing patterns. The ghost appeared almost exclusively on humid summer nights, usually near the bend where Evelyn had disappeared, and would vanish once someone tried to approach too closely. The town even started holding informal vigils, where groups would gather at a safe distance from the river to observe and document any activity. One night, a small team of amateur paranormal investigators set up cameras and recording devices along the riverbank. For hours, nothing happened. Then, shortly after midnight, one of the infrared cameras caught a faint, glowing silhouette gliding across the river, leaving ripples on the water as it passed. Audio devices reportedly recorded low, indistinct whispering, with phrases that sounded like a desperate call for help. Over the following months, Riverbend became something of a minor attraction for ghost hunters and curious travelers. Though the locals were divided, some viewed the interest as harmless, while others resented the disruption and believed the spirit deserved peace, not an audience. By the end of 1994, sightings had become less frequent, as if the spirit had retreated, but tales of that summer continued to circulate. Families who experienced the events firsthand described a lingering sense of sorrow when they visited the river, a reminder that the past and the present sometimes intersect in ways we cannot fully explain. Today, the bend where Evelyn Moore disappeared remains a site of cautious curiosity. Canoers, fishermen, and hikers occasionally report glimpses of a woman in white, a soft cry over the water, or the fleeting impression of being watched. Some say it is Evelyn, trapped in a cycle of grief, while others suggest that the river itself holds memories, projecting them to those sensitive enough to perceive them. Whether one interprets these accounts as paranormal evidence, folklore, or psychological suggestion, the story endures because it touches something fundamental: the human fascination with mystery, loss, and the unknown. And that's something worth remembering the next time you find yourself walking along a quiet riverbank, the night air heavy with stories waiting to be told, and the water reflecting more than just the moonlight.